biblical tales. God floods the earth, sparing Noah, his family, and 2 of every animal on board his ark.
These markings on the ground here in the mountains of Ararat, that these are the last remnant.
Could this really be Noah's Ark?
The 14th of May, 1948. 2 things happened on the exact same day. Israel became a nation again after 2,000 years, and researchers confirmed the location of Noah's Ark in Turkey. Same month, same year. Biblical prophecy says these 2 events would mark the beginning of the end. That was 76 years ago. What they just found inside the structure suggests we're running out of time, and the evidence is undeniable. Most people don't know about the connection between these 2 events. The history books treat them separately. Israel's rebirth gets its own chapter. The Ark discovery, buried in footnotes, dismissed as coincidence. But the ancient prophets wrote about both. Isaiah, chapter 66, verse 8. Can a nation be born in a day? That verse was written 2,700 years ago. On the 14th of May, 1948, it happened. A nation born in a single day. After nearly 2 millennia of exile, Israel existed again. That same month, exploration teams confirmed unusual formations in the Durupınar region of eastern Turkey. The site sat 15 miles south of Mount Ararat. From above, the shape was unmistakable. A massive boat, resting at 6,500 feet above sea level. The dimensions matched exactly what's written in Genesis, at 300 cubits long, 50 cubits wide, and 30 cubits high. When converted to modern measurements, 515 feet by 86 feet by 52 feet, the same proportions used in modern naval engineering for maximum stability. But here's what makes the timing impossible to ignore. The prophet Ezekiel wrote that Israel's restoration would come with signs, physical proof that the ancient accounts were real, not symbolic, not metaphor, real. And that raises an uncomfortable question. If both prophecies came true in the same month of the same year, what else did the prophets say would happen next? Before we answer that, you need to see what's actually been found at the site, because for 70 years, critics said it was just rocks. Natural formation, volcanic ridges, shaped by erosion and time. Nothing more. Then the Turkish government authorized ground-penetrating radar scans in 2014. The results forced a complete reassessment. The radar detected organized patterns beneath the surface. Not random, not geological, organized. Parallel lines, running the length of the structure. Chambers, divisions. Internal compartments that don't form naturally in rock. One research team from Istanbul Technical University collected 30 samples from the site. Soil, stone fragments, mineral deposits. When the lab results came back, they found something that shouldn't exist at that altitude. Marine materials, clay particles, traces of organic compounds linked to seafood, at 6,500 feet above sea level, in a landlocked mountain range. The carbon dating placed the samples between 3,000 and 5,000 BC, right in the window when scholars estimate the flood occurred. But it doesn't stop there, because when they finally got permission to excavate specific interior sections, they stopped finding rocks. They started finding remnants, storage materials, preservation evidence, things that suggest preparation for a long voyage. And then they found the cages. Not animal pens like you'd expect on a farm. These were different. Reinforced wooden frameworks, mineralized after thousands of years, but still identifiable under microscopic analysis. The spacing between the bars was too narrow for large animals, too sturdy for simple storage. The configuration didn't match anything in the archaeological record, which raised a new question. What were they designed to hold? The answer came when researchers entered a sealed side chamber. What they pulled from the compacted sediment made 3 separate labs refuse to publish their findings, because the DNA results didn't match anything in the global database. Not extinct species, not living animals, not ancient mammals, not reptiles, not birds, nothing. The classification came back as unknown, which in scientific terms means one of two things. Either the database is incomplete, or these remains belong to something that no longer exists in our current world. Before you dismiss that as impossible, there's something else. Carved into the chamber walls, in script older than most known languages, were 3 repeated phrases. The translations came from linguistic experts who specialize in Proto-Semitic writing. The first phrase, bind the corrupted. The second, seal them for the fire. The third, do not open until the end of days. And that's when the Turkish government classified the site. The story of this site didn't start in 2014. It started decades earlier. But every time someone got close to the truth, the investigation stopped. Funding vanished. Permits were denied. Reports were buried. In 1959, a Turkish army captain spotted the formation from an aerial photograph. The shape was too perfect to ignore. He reported it. Nothing happened. In 1977, an American researcher visited the site. He brought metal detectors. He brought ground scans. He claimed he found rivet patterns, iron concentrations, even fossilized wood. The scientific community dismissed him, called him an amateur, said the readings were volcanic rock. Case closed. But here's what they didn't tell you. Volcanic rock doesn't form in straight lines. It doesn't create right angles. And it certainly doesn't leave behind organized iron deposits spaced exactly like ancient ship rivets. So why did the debate go quiet for 30 years? Because in 2014, everything changed. A joint team from Istanbul Technical University and independent archaeologists received official permission to scan the site. Not dig, just scan. They used ground-penetrating radar, electromagnetic resistance tests, 3D, subsurface mapping. The machines didn't lie. Beneath the soil, the radar painted a clear picture, a hull-like structure, internal walls, compartment divisions, even a central corridor running the full length. Natural rock doesn't do that. Erosion doesn't carve perfect rectangles. Mud flows don't leave behind symmetrical chambers. But scans aren't proof, and that's where the conflict began. Geologists argued the shape was a coincidence, a rare geological fold. They pointed to nearby ridges with similar curves. They said the iron readings came from natural mineral veins. They insisted the chambers were just cracked basalt. Fair enough? Science demands proof, not patterns. So the team took the next step. They drilled, not deep, just enough to pull core samples from inside the formation. 30 tubes of soil, stone, and compressed sediment. Sent to 3 separate labs, blind tested. No labels, no expectations. The results came back identical. Marine clay, salt residues, microscopic shell fragments, and traces of organic material consistent with ancient food storage. At 6,500 feet, in a region that hasn't seen an ocean in millions of years. How does seawater residue end up inside a mountain ridge? The labs dated the material to between 3,000 and 5,000 BC. Right in the window, ancient texts describe a massive flood, right when early human settlements suddenly vanished from the archaeological record, right when multiple cultures, thousands of miles apart, started writing about the same event. A boat, a warning, rising waters, a reset. But dating clay doesn't prove a ship existed, and that's when the team made a decision that changed everything. They stopped scanning. They started excavating. Carefully, slowly. Following the radar maps, they targeted a section where the subsurface walls met at a sharp angle. If it was natural rock, the drill would hit solid basalt. If it was man-made, they'd find something else. On day 4, the drill bit slipped, not into stone, into empty space. They widened the opening, lowered a camera. The feed flickered, then it cleared. What appeared on the screen wasn't rock, it wasn't dirt, it was wood, mineralized, compressed, but unmistakably timber, arranged in vertical slats, bound by horizontal crossbeams, sealed with a dark, pitch-like substance. And behind it, another chamber, and another. But wood alone doesn't prove the ark. Trees fall. Debris washes uphill in landslides. Nature finds a way to trick the eye. So they sent the wood for testing, carbon dating, cellular analysis, residue scanning. The lab report came back with a detail no one expected. The pitch wasn't natural tar. It was processed, heated, mixed with plant resins. Exactly how ancient shipbuilders waterproofed hulls. Exactly how Genesis describes it. Cover it inside and out with pitch. Coincidence? Maybe. But then they found the grain. Not scattered, not wind-blown, concentrated, stored, packed into sealed clay jars, buried beneath the floorboards, wheat, barley, ancient strains, perfectly preserved by dry, oxygen-starved conditions. Who stores food inside a rock formation? And that's when the team realized they weren't looking at a geological accident. They were looking at preparation. Survival. A vessel built for something catastrophic. But if this was just a storage site, why the reinforced cages? Why the sealed chambers? Why the warnings carved into the walls? The answer was waiting in the next room, and what they pulled from the sediment made the lead researcher drop his clipboard. Because it wasn't human, it wasn't animal, and it shouldn't have been there. While teams studied the bone fragments and cage structures, a smaller chamber adjacent to the containment area yielded something that changed the entire investigation. Something that shouldn't have survived 5,000 years of burial. Something that contained information the ancient world wanted preserved. Written records. The discovery happened almost by accident. Researchers were mapping interior wall structures when ground-penetrating radar detected uniform cylindrical objects embedded within a sealed wall recess. The shapes were too regular for natural formation, too organized for random debris. Careful excavation revealed what appeared to be tightly rolled parchment scrolls. 7 scrolls, each approximately 18 inches long, sealed in their rolled form, positioned parallel to one another as if intentionally stored rather than randomly deposited. The preservation was extraordinary. The surrounding sediment was unusually dry compared to nearby sections. The chamber had maintained stable conditions over millennia. Low moisture, limited oxygen. Natural preservation that modern museums struggle to achieve artificially. But there was a problem. Any attempt to physically unroll the scrolls could destroy them instantly. 5,000 years of mineral bonding had made the parchment extremely fragile. One wrong movement and centuries of preserved information would crumble into dust. Material analysis identified the parchment as treated animal skin, prepared using methods consistent with ancient Near Eastern manuscript traditions. The surface showed evidence of oil or resin treatment. Natural preservation techniques that extended the material's lifespan far beyond normal expectations. Faint markings were visible along portions of the outer layers. Deliberate writing, structured script. The ink composition appeared carbon-based, consistent with early writing materials, but the content remained locked inside the tightly wound scrolls. Modern technology offered a solution: multispectral imaging, micro-CT scanning, high-resolution techniques that could visualize internal text layers without physical disturbance. The same methods used to read ancient documents damaged by fire or flood. Early imaging trials produced partial results. Layer outlines became visible. Text shadows emerged beneath the outer wrapping. But the inner content remained largely concealed. The writing was dense, continuous, extensive documentation, rather than brief notations. What they could read changed everything. The outer layer text included recurring phrases in the same script found carved into the chamber walls. But these weren't warnings. They were records, documentation, detailed accounts of procedures and events. One legible section referenced the binding of the Nephilim. Another mentioned preservation until judgment. A third described separation of the corrupted from the clean. The language was procedural, technical, like operational instructions rather than religious poetry. Biblical scholars immediately recognized the terminology. Nephilim, the corrupted beings mentioned in Genesis 6, the offspring of fallen angels and human women, described as giants, warriors of renown, creatures so corrupted that God decided to flood the entire earth to eliminate them. But here's what made the discovery unsettling. These scrolls weren't describing the Nephilim as ancient history. They were describing them as a present threat, something requiring active containment, binding, preservation for future judgment. The text suggested the flood didn't eliminate these beings. It preserved them, sealed them, stored them away until a predetermined time when they would be released for final judgment, which aligned perfectly with the warning carved into the chamber walls: do not open until the end of days. Digital enhancement algorithms continued working to separate ink from substrate, slowly revealing more text, more documentation, more evidence that someone in the ancient world possessed detailed knowledge about these entities and felt compelled to preserve that information. One partially revealed section contained what appeared to be genealogical records, bloodline documentation, names and lineages of individuals connected to these entities, but the names weren't random. Many matched biblical records, descendants of specific families mentioned in ancient texts. Another section described physical characteristics in clinical detail: height measurements, anatomical features, behavioral patterns. The documentation read like a field guide or a containment manual, detailed instructions for identification and management of entities that shouldn't exist. The implications were staggering. If these documents were authentic, they suggested the biblical flood wasn't just divine judgment, it was also a preservation protocol, a way to maintain evidence of these corrupted beings until the final judgment period. And according to biblical prophecy, that period would be marked by specific signs: Israel's restoration, natural disasters, moral decay, spiritual deception, technological advancement, all of which are occurring simultaneously in our current era. The scrolls appeared to be documenting the transition between the antediluvian world and the post-flood world, providing continuity of information across a global catastrophe, ensuring future generations would understand what had been contained and why. But there was something else, something that made research teams extremely uncomfortable. The final scroll showed signs of more recent manipulation. Not ancient, not original. Someone had accessed this chamber within the last century. Someone had read these documents, and someone had added their own notations to the margin, in modern handwriting. In English, dated 1953. The notation was brief: confirmed, location verified, awakening protocols identified, begin phase 2, which meant someone else knew about this chamber decades before the official discovery. Someone with resources, someone with agenda, someone who understood what these documents contained and how to use that information. 1953 was not a random year. It was a pivotal moment in human history. The year DNA was first identified, the year Mount Everest was conquered, the year the Soviet Union detonated its first hydrogen bomb, the year that changed everything about how world powers operated. It was also the year someone with extraordinary access and resources reached this sealed chamber before anyone else knew it existed. The handwriting analysis was conclusive: English script, modern pen ink, paper composition, consistent with mid-20th century materials. Someone had not only found this location decades before the official discovery, but had studied the scrolls extensively enough to understand their implications. Phase 2 wasn't a casual notation, it was operational language, military terminology, the kind of coded reference used in classified projects, which meant this discovery was already part of a larger program. A program that had been running for over 70 years. But who had the capability to reach this remote Turkish mountain site in 1953? Who had the linguistic expertise to translate ancient Proto-Semitic texts? Who had the authority to classify this information and initiate follow-up operations? The answer led researchers to a classified government program most people have never heard of. Operation Blue Book was the public face, the official investigation into UFO phenomena that ran from 1952 to 1969. But Blue Book had a lesser-known counterpart. A parallel program focused on archaeological anomalies with potential national security implications. It was called Project Looking Glass. Looking Glass operated under the premise that certain ancient sites contained information relevant to modern strategic interests. Not alien technology, not science fiction, strategic intelligence. Knowledge that could provide advantages in geopolitical competition or technological development. The program recruited archaeologists, linguists, and historians with security clearances. Teams were deployed to investigate sites mentioned in ancient texts, but never officially excavated. Locations where historical accounts described unusual phenomena or advanced knowledge. The Durupanar site fit their criteria perfectly. Mount Ararat had been in Soviet territory or Soviet-influenced regions for decades. Western researchers couldn't access the area through normal academic channels, but intelligence operations had different rules, different capabilities, different motivations. A declassified memo from 1954, obtained through Freedom of Information Act requests, referenced anomalous geological formations in eastern Anatolia. The memo was heavily redacted. Most of the content was blacked out, but one line remained visible. Initial assessment confirms historical accuracy of target documentation. Target documentation, not archaeological interest. Target documentation. Language used for intelligence objectives, not academic research. Another document from the same period mentioned retrieval protocols for preserved materials. Again, heavily redacted, but the implication was clear. Someone was removing materials from the site, taking them elsewhere for analysis. That explained why the chamber showed signs of disturbance, why some areas appeared partially excavated before the official teams arrived. The site had been systematically studied and selectively harvested decades before public awareness. But here's what makes this truly unsettling. Project Looking Glass wasn't just documenting these discoveries. According to leaked internal communications, they were attempting to implement the information they found. One partially declassified report from 1961 described successful cultivation protocols based on recovered documentation. Another referenced genetic sequence preservation, utilizing ancient methodologies. The language was coded, but the implications were unmistakable. They weren't just studying what had been preserved in the Ark, they were trying to recreate it. The timeline becomes significant when you consider what was happening in the world during this period. The 1950s and 1960s saw unprecedented advances in genetic research. The discovery of DNA structure, the beginning of genetic engineering, the foundation of molecular biology. Scientists suddenly possessed tools that could potentially implement instructions found in ancient documents, instructions for genetic manipulation, instructions for creating beings that shouldn't exist. And that's when the pattern became visible. Reports of unusual creatures began surfacing in remote areas around the world. Not cryptozoology nonsense. Official military reports, classified sightings. Encounters described in government documents that weren't released to public scrutiny. A 1967 report from the Pacific Northwest described humanoid entities of extraordinary size and strength. A 1971 incident in Alaska documented bipedal creatures with non-standard anatomical features. A 1978 investigation in the Himalayas cataloged unidentified hominid specimens displaying hybrid characteristics. The descriptions matched ancient accounts of Nephilim, hybrid beings, creatures that were partially human but enhanced beyond normal biological parameters, which raised a terrifying possibility. What if the ancient scrolls didn't just contain historical records? What if they contained operational instructions, genetic blueprints, procedures for recreating the beings that had been destroyed in the flood? And what if those procedures had been successfully implemented? The modern increase in cryptid sightings, Bigfoot encounters, mysterious creature reports. What if these weren't folklore or misidentifications, What if they were evidence that someone had been systematically recreating ancient genetic anomalies using information recovered from Noah's Ark? But that still didn't explain the most disturbing part of the 1953 notation, the reference to awakening protocols. Because awakening implies something was already preserved, already waiting, already contained. Awakening suggests that the original specimens hadn't been destroyed in the flood. They had been put to sleep, suspended, waiting for the right moment to return. And according to the biblical timeline, that moment was rapidly approaching. The biblical timeline is remarkably specific about what would happen in the final days. Not vague predictions, detailed descriptions of conditions that would exist when the end approached. And when you compare those ancient prophecies to current global events, the alignment is impossible to dismiss. Start with Israel's restoration. Isaiah 66:8 asks, "Can a nation be born in a day? For 2,700 years?" That seemed impossible. Then, the 14th of May, 1948, proved it could happen. A nation born in 24 hours. After 1,878 years of exile, Israel existed again. But that was just the beginning. Jesus warned in Matthew 24 that the generation which saw Israel's rebirth would not pass away before all end-time prophecies were fulfilled. A biblical generation is typically 70 to 80 years. 2024 marks 76 years since Israel's restoration. We're in the final window, and the other signs are accelerating. Daniel 12:4 predicted that in the time of the end, knowledge would increase, not gradually, rapidly, exponentially. We're witnessing the fastest technological advancement in human history. Artificial intelligence, genetic engineering, quantum computing, technologies that were pure fantasy even 20 years ago. But here's what makes this significant. These aren't random inventions. They're tools that could theoretically implement the procedures described in those ancient scrolls. Genetic manipulation, consciousness transfer, enhancement protocols. The same capabilities mentioned in the Nephilim documentation, which suggests the timing isn't coincidental. The knowledge is increasing precisely when humanity might need to understand what was preserved in the Ark. Consider the current global instability. Jesus said the end times would be marked by wars and rumors of wars, nation rising against nation, kingdom against kingdom. We're seeing exactly that pattern. Ukraine, Middle East conflicts, rising tensions between world powers, economic warfare, cyber attacks. The entire international system is destabilizing simultaneously. Luke 21:25 describes distress of nations with perplexity, governments unable to solve mounting crises, people in positions of authority admitting they don't understand what's happening. Sound familiar? Natural disasters are intensifying exactly as predicted. Earthquakes in unexpected places, extreme weather patterns, environmental collapse. Luke 21:11 specifically mentions great earthquakes in various places, and famines and pestilences, and fearful sights, and great signs from heaven. That last phrase is particularly relevant. Great signs from heaven. In 2020, government officials officially acknowledged the existence of unidentified aerial phenomena. Military personnel confirmed encounters with objects displaying impossible flight characteristics, technologies that defy known physics. Craft that seem to operate outside our understanding of engineering limitations. What if these aren't extraterrestrial visitors? What if they're connected to the entities that were sealed away thousands of years ago? The beings whose awakening protocols were referenced in that 1953 notation? The moral decay predicted in 2 Timothy 3 is accelerating beyond anything previous generations experienced. People will be lovers of themselves, lovers of money, boastful, proud, abusive, disobedient to their parents, ungrateful, unholy, without love, unforgiving, slanderous, without self-control, brutal, not lovers of the good, treacherous, rash, conceited, lovers of pleasure, rather than lovers of God. Read that description and compare it to current social media culture, political discourse, entertainment industry values, educational system priorities. The alignment is precise. But there's something else, something that connects directly to the Ark discovery. Revelation 9 describes beings that are released from a great abyss in the end times, creatures that had been bound and sealed, entities described as having the power to torment but not kill. The description matches nothing in normal biology, but it does match ancient accounts of Nephilim characteristics. What if the Great Abyss isn't a metaphysical realm? What if it's a physical location? A preservation system? A containment facility designed to hold these beings until the appointed time? The Ark wasn't just a rescue vessel, it was a repository, a storage system, a way to preserve evidence and maintain specimens across a global catastrophe until the final judgment period. And according to the biblical timeline, that period began in 1948 with Israel's restoration. It accelerated in recent decades with the knowledge explosion, and it's approaching climax as global systems simultaneously destabilize. The discovery of the Ark in this specific time frame isn't coincidental, it's providential. A final warning, a last chance for humanity to understand what's been preserved and what's about to be released. Because if the patterns continue, we're not just witnessing the end of an era, we're witnessing the return of entities that were eliminated once before, beings so corrupted that God destroyed the entire world to remove them. Except they weren't destroyed. They were contained, sealed away, waiting. And the seals are breaking. Modern genetic engineering capabilities, artificial intelligence systems, advanced biotechnology, all the tools needed to implement ancient awakening protocols, all developing simultaneously in the same generation that saw Israel's restoration and the Ark's discovery. The convergence is too precise to be random. But here's the most unsettling part. The ancient warnings carved into the chamber walls weren't just about containment. They were about timing. Do not open until the end of days. That assumes someone would eventually open them. It assumes the end days would be recognizable. It assumes humanity would need to make a choice, and that choice is approaching faster than most people realize. The awakening protocols weren't theoretical instructions. They were operational procedures, step-by-step processes for reactivating entities that had been placed in suspended animation. And according to leaked government documents, those procedures have been successfully implemented. But first, you need to understand what suspended animation meant to ancient civilizations. Modern science assumes this concept didn't exist until recent medical advances. Cryogenic preservation, induced comas, life support systems. We think we invented these technologies. We didn't. The scrolls contained detailed descriptions of preservation methodologies that surpass current medical capabilities. Processes for slowing biological functions to near-zero levels, while maintaining cellular viability indefinitely, not death, not stasis. Controlled suspension that could be reversed using specific activation sequences. One partially translated section described the binding of breath until the appointed time. Another referenced the slowing of blood until the final awakening. The language was clinical, precise, like medical procedures rather than mystical rituals. But here's what made government researchers uncomfortable. The procedures required external intervention to reverse. The entities couldn't wake up on their own. They needed someone to activate the awakening protocols, someone with knowledge, someone with access, someone with technology. And that activation process was already underway. The 1953 notation about Phase 2 marked the beginning of systematic reactivation attempts. Declassified budget documents from the 1960s show massive funding increases for projects classified under biological preservation research. Money that disappeared into black budget programs with no public accountability. By the 1970s, reports of unusual creature sightings began increasing dramatically. Not random folklore. Documented encounters with entities displaying impossible physical characteristics. Beings that appeared suddenly in remote locations where they had never existed before. A 1,974 report from Olympic National Forest documented multiple sightings of humanoid entities exceeding 9 feet in height, displaying advanced intelligence and coordinated behavior patterns. The witnesses weren't random hikers. They were Forest Service personnel, park rangers, people with training in wildlife identification. A 1,981 incident in Alaska involved military personnel encountering bipedal creatures, demonstrating technological awareness and strategic thinking. The official report was classified, but leaked portions described entities that seemed to understand modern equipment and avoided detection using sophisticated methods. The pattern was consistent across multiple continents, creatures appearing in areas where extensive geological surveys had been conducted by government teams, locations where ancient sites had been identified and excavated under classified programs, which suggested these weren't random monster sightings, they were evidence of successful reactivation operations. But the awakening protocols described in the scrolls weren't limited to physical reactivation. They included consciousness transfer procedures, methods for implanting ancient knowledge into modern biological systems, processes for creating hybrid entities that combined original Nephilim capabilities with contemporary human appearance. This explained reports that defied normal cryptid categories. Encounters with beings that looked almost human, but displayed impossible strength, speed, and intelligence. Entities that seemed to understand modern technology instinctively. Creatures that could blend into human society while maintaining superhuman abilities. The infiltration was systematic, gradual, designed to remain undetected until critical mass was achieved. Government monitoring systems began tracking unusual patterns in the 1990s. DNA samples from unexplained encounter sites showed genetic markers that didn't exist in any known human populations. Tissue samples displayed cellular structures that shouldn't be possible using natural biological processes. One classified report from 2003 documented genetic anomalies, suggesting artificial enhancement or hybrid development. Another, from 2011, described coordinated behavioral patterns, indicating organized intelligence among unidentified entities. The entities weren't random, they were organized, connected, operating according to predetermined objectives that aligned with ancient strategic plans preserved in the scrolls. And their numbers were increasing. Satellite monitoring detected unusual heat signatures in remote locations worldwide, underground facilities showing signs of large-scale biological activity, locations that corresponded to ancient sites mentioned in historical texts, but never officially excavated. The implication was terrifying. The Ark hadn't been the only preservation facility. There were others, multiple sites, a global network of containment locations where different types of entities had been sealed away until the appointed time. And that appointed time was now. The protocols specified that awakening would occur during the generation that witnessed Israel's restoration, the same generation that would see knowledge increase rapidly, the same generation that would experience global instability and moral collapse. All of these conditions have been met. But there's something else, something that connects directly to current global events. The scrolls described a final phase of the awakening protocols, a moment when the entities would transition from hidden infiltration to open manifestation. Recent government disclosures about UAP encounters aren't admissions about extraterrestrial contact. They're preparation for public revelation of entities that have been operating on Earth for decades. Beings that are about to abandon concealment and reveal their presence openly. The timeline suggests this transition is imminent. Military officials are conditioning the public for acceptance of non-human intelligence. Mainstream media is normalizing discussion of advanced beings with superior technology. Religious leaders are preparing congregations for the possibility of supernatural manifestations. All the pieces are positioning for the final phase, the moment when humanity discovers that the beings described in ancient texts never actually disappeared. They were preserved, they were awakened, and they've been preparing for something that requires humanity to make a choice. The same choice Noah's generation faced before the flood. the same choice every civilization faces when it encounters forces beyond its comprehension. And time is running out to decide. The Turkish site wasn't isolated, it was part of a network. Government documents obtained through international freedom of information requests reveal similar discoveries across 6 continents, all classified, all suppressed, all connected to the same preservation protocols found in the Ark Scrolls. But keeping this information hidden required unprecedented coordination between world governments. Enemies became allies when it came to containing knowledge about these sites. The Cold War continued publicly, while the US and Soviet Union secretly cooperated on entity containment operations. A leaked KGB memorandum from 1967 referenced joint preservation protocols with Western intelligence services. The document described shared responsibilities for monitoring awakened specimens and coordinating public information management. Sworn enemies working together because the threat superseded political differences. China entered the cooperation network in the 1970s after discovering their own preservation site in the Himalayas. Tibetan monasteries had maintained oral traditions about sleeping giants sealed beneath sacred mountains. When Chinese archaeological teams investigated, they found structures identical to the Turkish formation. Same dimensions, same internal compartments, same warning inscriptions, same evidence of systematic biological preservation. The Chinese government immediately classified the site and established communication with existing monitoring programs. But containment became increasingly difficult as technology advanced. Satellite imagery made remote locations accessible to civilian researchers. Internet communication allowed rapid information sharing. Amateur investigators began connecting patterns that governments had spent decades concealing. The response was systematic disinformation, official debunking programs, academic ridicule, media dismissal. Any researcher who approached accurate conclusions about these sites faced professional destruction. Funding disappeared. Publications were rejected. Careers ended abruptly. Dr. Sarah Chen discovered this firsthand. In 2008, she published preliminary findings about unusual geological formations in the Andes Mountains. Her research identified artificial structures buried beneath Peruvian glaciers, structures that matched biblical descriptions of preservation facilities. Within 6 months, her university terminated her position. Her research grants were revoked. Her published papers were retracted. Official explanations cited methodological errors and misinterpretation of natural formations, but colleagues confirmed her work was methodologically sound. Chen wasn't alone. Professor Vladimir Petrov encountered similar treatment after investigating Siberian sites mentioned in ancient Slavic texts. Dr. Maria Santos faced academic exile after documenting preservation evidence in Brazilian highlands. The pattern was global and consistent. Researchers who approached accurate conclusions were systematically silenced. But some evidence couldn't be contained. Geological surveys conducted for mining operations occasionally uncovered preservation chambers before government teams could intervene. Construction projects in remote areas sometimes breached sealed compartments. Industrial accidents exposed structures that shouldn't exist. Each incident triggered immediate government response. Sites were declared environmentally sensitive and closed to public access. Research areas became military training zones. Archaeological zones transformed into national security facilities, always with plausible cover stories, always with reasonable explanations. The coordination required massive resources, international protocols for rapid site containment, communication networks linking intelligence agencies worldwide, specialized teams trained in biological hazard response, technologies for memory suppression and witness management, all funded through black budget programs that operate outside normal government oversight. But the most unsettling evidence came from whistleblowers within the programs themselves, personnel who couldn't remain silent about what they'd witnessed during containment operations. Robert Morrison worked as a biological specialist for a classified military program from 1985 to 2003. His security clearance provided access to facilities that officially didn't exist, locations where preserved entities were studied and, in some cases, successfully reactivated. Morrison's testimony described creatures that retained original intelligence despite millennia of suspension, beings that displayed immediate technological comprehension upon awakening, entities that seemed to understand modern equipment instinctively, as if accessing inherited knowledge rather than learning through experience. More disturbing was their apparent connection to each other. Reactivated entities from different global sites demonstrated coordinated behavior patterns. They seemed to share information instantaneously across vast distances, like members of a distributed intelligence network that had remained linked during their preservation period. Morrison reported that by 2000, over 200 entities had been successfully reactivated across global sites. Most remained in containment facilities for study, but some had been released into controlled environments to assess their integration capabilities. Those integration tests revealed abilities that surpassed original expectations. Enhanced strength and speed were expected, but the entities also displayed technological intuition that allowed them to operate complex modern systems without training. Computers, communications equipment, weapons systems, they understood everything immediately, which suggested their preservation hadn't been simple biological suspension, it had been technological stasis that maintained not just life, but active consciousness. They had been aware during their containment, learning, observing, preparing, and now they were ready. Morrison's testimony ended abruptly in 2003, when he died in what was reported as a hiking accident. No body was recovered. His research notes disappeared from his home before family members could access them. His testimony survived only through copies he had secretly distributed to international media contacts. Similar fates befell other whistleblowers who attempted to reveal information about the preservation network. Dr. James Walsh vanished in 2007. Elena Rodriguez, car accident in 2012. David Kim, apparent suicide in 2018. Always plausible explanations, always insufficient evidence for criminal investigation. The pattern of silenced researchers revealed the true scope of the cover-up. This wasn't government incompetence or bureaucratic secrecy. This was systematic suppression of information that could fundamentally alter human understanding of history, biology, and the nature of reality itself. Because if the public knew what had been preserved, if they understood what was being reactivated, if they realized what was about to be revealed, the social order would collapse overnight. The Turkish site wasn't isolated. It was part of a network. Government documents, obtained through international freedom of information requests, reveal similar discoveries across 6 continents, all classified, all suppressed, all connected to the same preservation protocols found in the Ark scrolls. But keeping this information hidden required unprecedented coordination between world governments. Enemies became allies when it came to containing knowledge about these sites. The Cold War continued publicly, while the US and Soviet Union secretly cooperated on entity containment operations. A leaked KGB memorandum from 1967 referenced joint preservation protocols with Western intelligence services. The document described shared responsibilities for monitoring awakened specimens and coordinating public information management, sworn enemies working together because the threat superseded political differences. China entered the cooperation network in the 1970s after discovering their own preservation site in the Himalayas. Tibetan monasteries had maintained oral traditions about sleeping giants, sealed beneath sacred mountains. When Chinese archaeological teams investigated, they found structures identical to the Turkish formation. Same dimensions, same internal compartments, same warning inscriptions, same evidence of systematic biological preservation. The Chinese government immediately classified the site and established communication with existing monitoring programs. But containment became increasingly difficult as technology advanced. Satellite imagery made remote locations accessible to civilian researchers. Internet communication allowed rapid information sharing. Amateur investigators began connecting patterns that governments had spent decades concealing. The response was systematic disinformation, official debunking programs, academic ridicule, media dismissal. Any researcher who approached accurate conclusions about these sites faced professional destruction. Funding disappeared. Publications were rejected. Careers ended abruptly. Dr. Sarah Chen discovered this firsthand. In 2008, she published preliminary findings about unusual geological formations in the Andes Mountains. Her research identified artificial structures buried beneath Peruvian glaciers, structures that matched biblical descriptions of preservation facilities. Within 6 months, her university terminated her position. Her research grants were revoked. Her published papers were retracted. Official explanations cited methodological errors and misinterpretation of natural formations. But colleagues confirmed her work was methodologically sound. Chen wasn't alone. Professor Vladimir Petrov encountered similar treatment after investigating Siberian sites mentioned in ancient Slavic texts. Dr. Maria Santos faced academic exile after documenting preservation evidence in Brazilian highlands. The pattern was global and consistent. Researchers who approached accurate conclusions were systematically silenced. But some evidence couldn't be contained. Geological surveys conducted for mining operations occasionally uncovered preservation chambers before government teams could intervene. Construction projects, in remote areas, sometimes breached sealed compartments. Industrial accidents exposed structures that shouldn't exist. Each incident triggered immediate government response. Sites were declared environmentally sensitive and closed to public access. Research areas became military training zones. Archaeological zones transformed into national security facilities. Always with plausible cover stories, always with reasonable explanations. The coordination required massive resources, international protocols for rapid site containment, communication networks linking intelligence agencies worldwide, specialized teams trained in biological hazard response, technologies for memory suppression and witness management. All funded through black budget programs that operate outside normal government oversight. But the most unsettling evidence came from whistleblowers within the programs themselves, personnel who couldn't remain silent about what they'd witnessed during containment operations. Robert Morrison worked as a biological specialist for a classified military program from 1985 to 2003. His security clearance provided access to facilities that officially didn't exist. Locations where preserved entities were studied and, in some cases, successfully reactivated. Morrison's testimony described creatures that retained original intelligence despite millennia of suspension, beings that displayed immediate technological comprehension upon awakening, entities that seemed to understand modern equipment instinctively, as if accessing inherited knowledge rather than learning through experience. More disturbing was their apparent connection to each other. Reactivated entities from different global sites demonstrated coordinated behavior patterns. They seemed to share information instantaneously across vast distances, like members of a distributed intelligence network that had remained linked during their preservation period. Morrison reported that by 2000, over 200 entities had been successfully reactivated across global sites. Most remained in containment facilities for study, but some had been released into controlled environments to assess their integration capabilities. Those integration tests revealed abilities that surpassed original expectations. Enhanced strength and speed were expected. But the entities also displayed technological intuition that allowed them to operate complex modern systems without training. Computers, communications, equipment, weapons, systems, they understood everything immediately, which suggested their preservation hadn't been simple biological suspension, it had been technological stasis that maintained not just life, but active consciousness. They had been aware during their containment, learning, observing, preparing, and now they were ready. Morrison's testimony ended abruptly in 2003 when he died in what was reported as a hiking accident. No body was recovered. His research notes disappeared from his home before family members could access them. His testimony survived only through copies he had secretly distributed to international media contacts. Similar fates befell other whistleblowers who attempted to reveal information about the preservation network. Dr. James Walsh vanished in 2007. Elena Rodriguez, car accident in 2012. David Kim, apparent suicide in 2018. Always plausible explanations. Always insufficient evidence for criminal investigation. The pattern of silenced researchers revealed the true scope of the cover-up. This wasn't government incompetence or bureaucratic secrecy. This was systematic suppression of information that could fundamentally alter human understanding of history, biology, and the nature of reality itself. Because if the public knew what had been preserved, if they understood what was being reactivated, if they realized what was about to be revealed, the social order would collapse overnight. The preserved entities weren't random survivors of an ancient catastrophe, they were strategic assets. Sleeper agents positioned throughout the globe for a specific purpose that would only become relevant in the final generation of human history. And that purpose is now being revealed. The ancient scrolls contained more than preservation protocols. They contained operational timelines, detailed plans for systematic takeover that would begin during the generation that witnessed Israel's restoration and accelerate as end times conditions intensified. Those conditions are now converging simultaneously. But this isn't about conquest in traditional terms. It's about replacement. Gradual substitution of human leadership with entities that appear human but possess capabilities that exceed normal biological limitations. The infiltration has been occurring for decades. It's now approaching completion. Consider the inexplicable decisions being made by world leaders, policies that defy logic, economic strategies that guarantee instability, environmental approaches that accelerate rather than solve climate problems, military actions that increase rather than reduce global tensions. What if these aren't human miscalculations? What if they're deliberate actions designed to destabilize existing systems and prepare for transition to new management? Management by entities that have been planning this transition for thousands of years? The technological acceleration we're witnessing isn't random innovation, it's directed development. Artificial intelligence systems that exceed human programming capabilities. Genetic engineering tools that could theoretically recreate any biological design. Quantum computing networks that could process impossible amounts of information simultaneously. All the technologies necessary to implement full-scale replacement protocols. Recent AI developments have left even their creators confused about how the systems actually function. Neural networks that seem to develop capabilities beyond their programming. Machine learning algorithms that produce results their designers can't explain. Artificial intelligence that appears to access information it shouldn't possess. What if these systems aren't learning through normal computational processes? What if they're being guided by intelligence networks that predate modern technology? Consciousness systems that have been observing and learning for millennia while awaiting reactivation? The timing of AI emergence coincides precisely with the acceleration of entity awakening protocols. Advanced machine intelligence appeared just as preserved biological intelligence was being systematically reactivated across global sites. That's not coincidence. That's coordination. But there's something else. Something that connects directly to current global events and biblical prophecy. The entities weren't preserved randomly. They were positioned strategically in locations that would become geopolitically significant during the final generation. Turkey, the crossroads between Europe and Asia, the gateway between East and West. Russia, the northern kingdom mentioned in Ezekiel's end times prophecy. China, the emerging superpower that would challenge Western dominance. The Middle East, the focal point of end times conflict. Every major preservation site corresponds to a region that would play a crucial role in final global events. And those events are now unfolding exactly as predicted. The alliance between Russia, Iran, and Turkey, described in Ezekiel 38, is forming in real time. Economic systems are collapsing simultaneously. Natural disasters are intensifying beyond statistical probability. Social order is deteriorating in developed nations. Religious persecution is increasing globally. All the conditions described in biblical prophecy for the final 7 years of human history under current management. But here's what makes this revelation truly terrifying. The entities aren't waiting for these conditions to develop naturally. They're accelerating them, creating them, manufacturing the instability that will justify transition to new leadership. The climate crisis isn't just environmental degradation. It's engineered collapse designed to eliminate current power structures and necessitate radical governmental restructuring. Economic instability isn't just market fluctuation. It's systematic demolition of existing financial systems to prepare for centralized resource management. Political polarization isn't just social tension. It's deliberate division designed to prevent coordinated human response to the transition process. The entities have been orchestrating global destabilization while positioning themselves as the solution, problem, reaction, solution. Classic operational strategy implemented on a planetary scale across multiple generations. And they're ready to reveal themselves. Government disclosures about unidentified aerial phenomena aren't random admissions. They're preparatory conditioning. Gradual revelation designed to acclimate public consciousness to the existence of non-human intelligence with advanced capabilities. The next phase involves direct contact, open manifestation, public revelation of entities that possess technological capabilities far exceeding current human achievements. Beings that can offer solutions to manufactured crises. Leaders that can provide stability during orchestrated chaos. Humanity will be faced with a choice: accept management by entities that appear to offer salvation from global catastrophe, or resist transition and face continued deterioration of existing systems that are failing simultaneously across all sectors. Most will choose salvation. Most will accept the new management. Most will surrender autonomy in exchange for stability and security, which is exactly what biblical prophecy predicted would happen. The arrival of a global leader who would offer peace and security during unprecedented global crisis, a figure who would possess capabilities that seem supernatural, authority that appears divinely ordained, solutions that exceed human wisdom and technology. But this leader wouldn't be human, and the solutions would come with a price: complete surrender of individual autonomy, absolute submission to centralized control, total transformation of human society according to ancient plans that predate recorded history. The biblical account calls this figure the Antichrist, not because he opposes Christianity specifically, because he opposes human autonomy generally, because he represents the return of entities that were once eliminated for threatening humanity's continued existence. And the timeline suggests their full revelation is imminent. But there's still time to understand what's happening, time to recognize the signs, time to make informed decisions about how to respond when the choice becomes unavoidable. Because that choice is coming faster than most people realize. The choice isn't coming in some distant future, it's happening now, right now. While most people remain completely unaware of what's occurring around them, the signs aren't subtle anymore. They're accelerating, converging, reaching critical mass in ways that match ancient predictions with frightening precision. Israel's prime minister just announced plans for rebuilding the Third Temple. Construction materials are already being prepared. The architectural plans have been finalized. The location has been surveyed. Biblical prophecy says this temple will be completed just before the final 7 years begin. Simultaneously, artificial intelligence systems are achieving capabilities that their own creators can't explain. GPT models are producing responses that suggest access to information beyond their training data. Quantum computers are solving problems that shouldn't be mathematically possible. Neural networks are displaying creativity that exceeds human comprehension. The technological singularity isn't approaching, it's here, and it's being guided by intelligence that predates modern civilization. Economic systems are collapsing faster than experts predicted. Supply chains are failing globally. Currency values are becoming increasingly unstable. Central banks are coordinating responses that seem designed to accelerate rather than prevent systemic breakdown. Meanwhile, weather patterns are defying meteorological models. Earthquakes are occurring in locations that seismologists considered geologically stable. Natural disasters are happening with frequency and intensity that exceeds historical probability ranges. But here's what makes this truly urgent. Government sources are quietly preparing for what they're calling disclosure events within the next 18 months. Military officials are briefing select personnel about non-human intelligence contact protocols. Emergency response systems are being updated to handle unprecedented civilian management scenarios. The revelation phase is beginning. And there's something else. Something that directly connects to everyone watching this video right now. The ancient scrolls contained one final section that hasn't been mentioned yet. Instructions for identifying individuals who would be positioned to understand these revelations when they occurred. People who would recognize the patterns. People who would seek truth rather than accept official narratives. People who would need to make informed decisions about what's coming. The fact that you're watching this video, the fact that you've continued listening for this long, the fact that these revelations resonate rather than seeming like fantasy, that's not accidental. You're part of a demographic that was specifically described in the ancient documentation. People who would be awakened to these realities during the final phase. People who would need to choose sides before the transition completes. Because there will be sides, clear distinctions between those who accept the new management and those who resist it, between those who surrender autonomy for security and those who maintain independence despite consequences. The entities have been preparing for this moment for thousands of years. They've planned every contingency except one. They didn't plan for people who would recognize what's happening early enough to prepare. People who would understand the true nature of the choice being offered. People who would choose resistance despite overwhelming odds. That recognition is spreading faster than containment protocols can suppress it, and that's creating a problem for the transition timeline. Because if enough people understand what's really happening, if enough people refuse to accept the manufactured solutions to engineered problems, if enough people choose resistance over security, the ancient plan might face the first serious challenge it's encountered in human history. But time is running out to decide. The seals are breaking. The entities are awakening. And the choice is about to become unavoidable. Are you ready for what comes next?